Back when I lived in Georgia, Columbus, I lived in this really old, terrible house on a property developed back in the late 1800s. The guy who originally bought the land and developed it was a real piece of works, because the property has like 9 different soil types on it, so he could make his own personal little paradise garden, and as someone with severe allergen issues, that kind of screwed me a lot living there. All except during the particularly heavy rains that washed away the literal waves of pollen and the rare snowy winters that we had there. Anyway, it's one of these rare snowy winters. I want to say, I forget the exact year to be honest, but late aughts I think. Or maybe it was early teens. Maybe some other poor sucker in Georgia can remind me when we had a good hard snow Columbus ways between maybe 15 and 20 years ago. But me and my dad are doing stuff around the house, i.e. he's drinking hard because he's a retired Marine, and Marines all have drinking problems to cope with PTSD. Obviously I'm being sarcastic, but he really did have a drinking problem at the time, and I'm awake despite the late hour, so he has someone other than my mum to pester with his incessant talking. Seriously, get my dad going when he's drunk and he's worse than a SoCal Valley girl. We're loading the fireplace though, the dogs are sleeping. We see the firewood pile is low and both go out to grab some more firewood. By which I mean mostly me carrying it because Dad's drunk and he's about to fall over. In any case, it's no longer snowing super hard, but it's still going and it's foggy as heck out there. There's a funeral home on the top of the hill beyond the house. It's past this sort of mid-sized retaining pond or pit that keeps our house from flooding when it rains real bad here, and the parking lot of the home had a couple of streetlights as well. From the lights nearest our house though, me and my dad see a silhouette out against the snow. It's small, maybe just over 4 feet tall, which says child, and me and my dad, being the at least halfway decent people that we are, start going up to see what the heck this is all about. I mean, why is there a kid out here at 0 dark 30? And we find this kid. He cannot be more than 10, maybe 11 years old, pale as death like he's been out in the snow for hours, and all he's wearing is a nightgown. He looks terrified and he's shaking and just stares at us, not saying a word. Dad sobers up almost instantly and gently tells the kid to follow us. Well, we gotta get him inside. I mean, he's gonna freeze to death out here. I agree, and we reach out to offer him a hand, but he recoils away and doesn't touch me. But he nods a bit when we gently invite him in, promise to get him warmed up and maybe something to eat or drink, and follow us down the hill and into the house. His face lights up immediately as soon as he's past the back door and in what is ostensibly our laundry room. He stops shivering. He stops looking scared and he just looks calm, content now. Dad and I turn to rush off to get him some blankets, towels, set up a space heater and all that. We'd both turned away from him for less than 2 seconds, and I turned back around real quick because I was going to ask him if he wanted soup or maybe some chicken or something. And he was just gone. Disappeared like a fart in the wind. I grab Dad's arm and he turns back and he almost turns as white as the kid was, which is impressive for someone who is visibly half Cherokee and thus much more red than white. But the kid is just 100% gone. We look outside, we weirdly see no footprints. The boy was barefoot, but the only tracks that were made were me and my dad's boots, nothing else. Dad and I just stared at each other for a while. Dad was clearly questioning whether or not he had some kind of a drunken hallucination, except for the fact that I was there and I had seen the boy too. And I mean, I almost never touch booze, so that was definitely not a hallucination on my end. Over the following week and a half, the both of us asked around about a boy in a nightgown, and it wasn't until Dad mentioned it to old Mrs. Funderburg. She died at like 98. She was only 96 at this point, so she'd been around for a long spell, but that's when we got an answer. Well, sort of anyway. According to Mrs. Funderburg, when she was a child and the area was a lot less developed, before she was born there was an old ghost story about a boy who had been found dead in a rare Georgia snowstorm not far from where our house was. apparently, this boy was also in nothing but a nightgown. Nobody knew how or why. All anyone had was guesses, but it wasn't uncommon for people to claim seeing a boy, or at least his silhouette, in our area in the dead of night during really bad snowstorms. But nobody had ever gotten close enough to him before. He'd always just run off or disappeared into the snow or the fog or whatever. The best guess that me and my dad could come up with after Mrs. Funderburg told us all that we knew is that the kid must have gotten locked outside of his house or something. I can also only hope by tragic accident rather than active cruelty or whatever, but it was during some major blizzard. There was a pretty bad one in 1910 apparently, but for my part I always figured that it must have been the Great Blizzard of 1899, and just couldn't get back in. Judging by what me and my dad saw, the boy had been pretty damn frail, and he would have been frozen to death quickly once the mercury went to like 32 Fahrenheit or lower or whatever. But he disappeared when we brought him inside. It's been a while since that happened, at least 15 years now, and nobody I've spoken to, including people who used to live in our immediate vicinity, has seen anything like me and what my dad saw. And sometimes, even now, I find myself wondering if that was actually real or just me and my dad having some sort of a shared hallucination somehow. Had that kid been there all this time? Was all he wanted is to be invited into someplace warm, maybe somewhere he used to live, and that was good enough? I can still see his face when I think about it. The half-frozen, scared little face. Did it really take 100-some-odd years or more for someone to even care enough to try and bring him out of the cold like that? If that's the case, that is truly tragic. Back when I was 14 years old, my family moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Massey, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I cannot quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or maybe it was because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven I always came home with horrific blisters. Whatever the case may be, although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside of one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. And because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Macy there, drop us off, and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always so quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker, or jogger passing us by. Now, on one particular evening, I had gone back to these woods with Macy, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands. Making our way along the trail, the evening had already started to become dimmer. Wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a bit of a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, me and Macy stumbled upon a small sort of teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a good game of hide-and-seek, I would sometimes hide inside the teepee when Macy wasn't looking, where she would spend the next couple of minutes circling around the hut trying to find me, not realizing that she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Macy that day or not, I cannot really remember, I'm not sure, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way that this man was walking, but the way that he did so felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I suppose, I quickly latched my lead back onto Macy and hurriedly made my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker, so again, turning to see if the man was behind me, I could still see him around the curve, only 10 meters away from me now. I did try to tell myself that I was just being paranoid and that this man was most likely not following me or anything, but my gut instinct just still told me that something was off. Thinking ahead, I pull out my phone to call my dad, as to make sure that he was already in the parking space waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed that he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped that my dad was nearly on his way. By the time that I made it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black now, and there was just one single car in the parking area, but it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope that he would be coming soon and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him to pass by, I tried to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets into his vehicle, the only car in the car park, but he doesn't drive away. He just stays there, sat inside of his car with both the engine and the headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here, and yet this very same stranger was. Trying to call and text my dad to say that I was waiting for him, I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off yet. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me, and for those whole 20 or however many more minutes it was, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing, though, was that my dog Macy had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Macy was in general a very nervous dog and basically whined at everything, but I don't know, something told me that she too felt as though something about this situation just wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt like longer than 20 or so minutes, the strange man, already with his engine and headlights on, reverses from his parking spot, exits out of the car park and onto the main road, leaving me and Macy in peace. And although we are now alone, basically stranded outside of a dark forest, I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come and get us, 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. And do you want to know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot that he had to pick us up. Now, I don't know if that man really was following me through the forest, although it certainly seemed like it. And I also don't know why he just sat in the car for 20 minutes, seemingly just watching me. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be that my dad can sometimes be just a careless douche. And 2, never hike through the forest alone, late in the evening, like I did. So this happened last night. Around 3 a.m., me and my brother were woken up by loud banging and crying at our front door. We live in a rough neighborhood, so naturally my brother grabs his shotgun, cocks it loudly, and starts yelling, "It's 3 a.m, go away," through the door. We were both really tired at this stage and freaked out. We'd recently had a girl from the neighborhood break into my car, so we assumed that it might be her again. I looked through the front door's window, we've got a one-way film on it, and didn't see anyone else around. I crouched near the door and listened, and it sounded like a young kid, completely hysterical, begging us to help her to call her mum. I told her that I was dialing 911 and that help was on the way. My brother, in full adrenaline mode, opens the door, still holding his shotgun, and starts yelling at her to calm down. I didn't agree with this approach, but in all fairness, she woke up about half the block from her screaming while she was pressed up against our door. After he opened the door, I finally got to see her as well. Honestly, I was kind of hoping that it was a homeless person from our area or even someone looking to do some weird stuff to us, but it was a kid, and the look in her eyes while she was kneeling at our doorstep honestly just made my heart drop. I was thinking that she was around 14, but she said that somebody crashed into her car down the street and that she left her phone in the wreck so she couldn't call her mother. Things weren't really adding up though, so I asked her a few more questions. She kept begging me to go down the street with her, but I told her no way, we're waiting for the cops. About maybe 10 minutes later, 3 tow trucks drive by, heading toward where we told 911 the crash happened, so I felt safe enough to walk with her down the street. On the way, she keeps asking to hold my hand, and I'm just thinking, you look like a teenager, you're barely dressed, and I'm a grown man walking through the neighborhood that you woke up. It's not a good look. I awkwardly asked how old she was, and she said that she was 18, and grabbed my hand anyway. I felt very uncomfortable, but her emotions were definitely outweighing mine at this stage. Halfway there, the cop shows up. I flag them down and explain the situation. Meanwhile, she's telling the officers over and over I have really bad ADHD and anxiety, while handing me her eyelashes, a full set of false lashes. I really didn't want to touch them, but I took them just to help her feel a little safer or whatever. One of the cops pulls her aside and the other starts casually asking me a few questions. He told me that they got another call about 30 minutes before that a teenager was running across someone's lawn barefoot or something, which I looked over and realized that she was barefoot the whole time. Then I saw them cuff her. I think they suspected that she was on something, which I was 50-50 thinking as well. As we're sort of wrapping up, the officer sees me still holding the eyelashes and goes, "What are you going to do with those, bro?" I just told him, "Well, I'll sleep on it. I just want to go back to bed, to be honest." I head home and start talking to one of the neighbors about it. He assumed that it was her parents' house or something, so he didn't want to get involved in domestic drama or whatever. Makes sense, and I just assumed that that's why nobody else got involved. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was shaken up and pretty worried about her, to be honest. I imagine that it was a traumatic experience for her too. I don't know if that was a justified reaction for her situation, or if she really was on drugs or mentally ill, but I will definitely be praying for her and her family, as obviously it's a bad situation. So, to set the scene, I'm a female and I'm 22, and literally weeks away from graduating from college and getting my bachelor's in theater arts. I actually only have a quarter of a credit left to get, so I'm doing work in the theater's department's costume shop to get that credit. It's really not anything too hard. I mean, I know how to do both hand sewing and use a sewing machine, so I've spent time doing both things and mending and adjusting garments for actors. The show? It's a musical, and there are some pretty intricate costumes though, so I was excited to help out to get that final bit of credit and graduate. The costume shop? It opened for weekend hours at around noon, but I stayed up late on Friday night, so I woke up at around 1. I got dressed and went to the costume shop as quick as I could, since I wanted to get all the hours possible. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but as I was approaching the theater building, something caught my eye. there was this guy standing off to the side of the front entrance. Now, the front entrance is pretty open. It's this set of pillars, and then there are 3 sets of glass doors that are led up to by a set of steps. Kind of Grecian, I guess you could say. The building is an old one, though, with an addition attached. That one containing the actual theatre, while the older building contains mainly classrooms. But this entrance is closest to the way that I usually use to get backstage, and into the costume shop as well. Anyway, the guy was kind of leaning against the stone side of the staircase, and what caught my attention is that I go to school in a very small campus, so usually when I see someone, I immediately recognize their face, even if I don't know their name. But I didn't recognize this guy at all. Physically, he wasn't overly weird looking, maybe a little bit disheveled, but his hair was kind of greasy and he had on a t-shirt and some tattered jeans, I guess. He looked college-aged, same as me, but what was even weirder was that he was wearing this heavy winter parka, even though it was nearing 65 degrees, as well as snow boots. In any case, we made eye contact, and nothing immediately sheeved me out. I'm a bit of an awkward person, so I just kind of gave a polite nod and a smile, and that was that. Honestly, though, I do think that that was my first mistake. He didn't smile back, too. In fact, his eyes followed me as I walked up the stairs and into the building. Super weird, but, okay, whatever. My campus does have some weirdos on it. I found that my school in particular seems to attract them, but I'm a senior, and I was pretty sure that I had all of the weirdos pretty much catalogued at this stage. But Parker Guy was not among my mental catalogue of campus oddities. I got down to the campus shop, and I must have looked troubled, I guess, because the person who was already down there, someone that I know on a somewhat personal level, greeted me and then asked if something was wrong. I told them about the guy, which somewhat amused them, and we speculated on who he could be for a while before they went up to check. Apparently, though, by this stage, he was gone, as I was told when they got back. Now, I worked on sewing literally halved beach balls into a bikini top. The show is a funky one, and listened to a podcast. I got there at 1, and it was around 4:30 that the person there with me left, leaving me alone. By this point, I moved on from the tops and was sewing some snaps onto the back of the blouse to make it fasten better. I took a bit of a break to work on a project due Monday. The seniorities are strong. Then got back to sewing a bit, my headphones off this time as it was just me down in the shop. Now, for this next part, I'm going to have to give you a bit of an idea of the layout of the shop. So, it's in the basement of the building and is a bit hard to get to if you don't know your way around here. The room is relatively large though. It's sort of shaped like an irregular rectangle, I guess, but is separated by the table set up in the middle of the room, the ones with the sewing machines on them. One side is on the way from the backstage behind the building's black box theater, as well as the dressing rooms, and then the other side leads out into this sort of hallway that has doors leading into the auditorium, as well as an exit out of the building. If that made any sense at all, then I'm really happy to hear that. But that direction also leads to the main costume storage room. Now, near where the sewing machine tables are is this door that leads outside and into what the costume director refers to as the weird little courtyard. When I was a freshman, I took a class with her and she warned us not to go out there since the door is locked from the outside, and if we do go out there, we won't be able to get back into the building. To be honest though, the courtyard is less of a courtyard and more a sort of space or an area where a bunch of buildings' machineries are, heating and cooling and all that, as well as electrical stuff, and it's all sort of located there together. It's all fenced in with a chain link fence about 15 feet high as well. But the door leading out there is one of those doors with a window. In this situation, I was sitting in a chair directly opposite the door, close to the wall across from it. So there was about maybe 20 odd feet of space between me and this door. It was nearing 6, but Since the show's dress rehearsals started that Monday, I wanted to get as much done as I could before I finished up and went for dinner. I was working on sewing the snaps onto the shirt when I heard a noise. It startled me since I'd settled onto the rhythm of the task and listening to what my podcast was talking about, and annoyingly I dropped my needle. It was still connected to the thread, so it wasn't lost altogether, and so I bent down to pick it up from where it had fallen to the floor near my feet. And it was when I lifted my head from that bent position that I saw the source of the noise. My vision was a little bit obscured because the space between me and the door was cluttered with a bunch of dress from mannequins that me and the other members of the crew had been using to put costume pieces on. So it was more that I saw the door's window wasn't empty anymore, I guess. I sort of shifted to the side a little bit to get a bit of a better look, and there at the door leading out into the maintenance courtyard was Parker Guy. The noise that I had heard had been him trying to open the door. Now, I have no idea how he got in there. That door is the only way into that courtyard, so I can only assume that he somehow scaled a 15-foot fence or something like that. Whatever the case, I froze like a deer in the headlights, and for a moment, it was just still as he stared at me and I stared at him. His face was expressionless, and it was as he continued to stare at me that I began to realize that this entire situation was wrong. I sort of settled back into my chair, really not sure what to do, and it was in this handful of seconds that Parker Guy started trying the door again. It was, as I said before, locked, so he wasn't able to open it, thank God. It's puzzling to me now as well that he didn't just come in through the front entrance, as none of the doors leading down to the costume studio were locked, but I don't know, maybe he tried that already because, like I said, the studio is a little bit tricky to locate if you don't know your way around the building. The only conclusion that I could come up with is that he tried what I mentioned above, couldn't find me, and then while wandering around the building, saw me through the door through the chain link fence, and proceeded to scale it. And it was at that point, upon that realization, that I then began to get a bit scared. The door leading into the studio was to my left, and on instinct, I got up to close it since it locks from the inside and you need a key to reopen it. It was as I was moving to close the door that the guy began to pound on the courtyard door. I don't know why my first instinct was to hide instead of opening the door that I'd just closed and booking it, but I went into the small fabric storage room directly behind me, shut the door, and called campus safety. Again, I'm not really sure why I called them and not the police. Campo called them later, but that's what I did. I don't know. People make decisions like this when they're scared, I guess, but by the time the campus safety came to investigate, which was pretty fast since I was clearly terrified on the phone, the guy was gone. Honestly, too, I don't know how he scaled the fence again in the time that it took them to arrive, but whatever the case, he was now gone. Campus safety escorted me back to my dorm and even went over to the dining hall to pick me up some dinner since I was very shaken, which I appreciated a lot. A while later, an officer came to take my statement since Campo called them, but as you can imagine, there wasn't much that they could do apart from keep an eye out for this guy. I still have no idea who he was or why he was even on campus, but it couldn't have been for any good reason. In fact, the way that he was behaving, it seemed predatory. This is something that happened to me when I was about 12 years old. I don't usually talk about it because people either don't believe me or they just don't care. But it's something that stuck with me for years, and when I tell you it, I can imagine that you'll understand why. So, it was during summer break. My cousin was staying at my house because he had broken his knee and needed help getting around and all that. He was a little bit older than me, but we were super close. We'd stay up all night playing video games, eating junk food, and just doing typical guy stuff. One night, though, I was in my room playing video games by myself. My cousin was in the living room. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I know that we were the only ones home at this stage. It was getting late, and I was about to shut everything down and go to sleep when I saw something. Something started crawling toward me in the dark. It looked human, but not quite. It was all messed up and deformed. The way that it moved, it didn't seem right at all. It also made these weird noises that I still have a hard time describing. At first, I thought it was my cousin playing some kind of a sick prank on me, until I remembered that his leg was broken. He couldn't even crawl like that if he wanted to. That was when I absolutely lost it. I ran out of that room as quickly as I could, and I didn't even look back. I told my cousin what I saw. He didn't really believe me, but I could tell that he was creeped out too. And after that, I refused to sleep in my room for at least a week. I just crashed on the couch in the living room and I kept the lights on all night. I ended up living in that house for another 6 years after that. Nothing quite like that ever happened again, but that room just never really felt right after that. I always had this weird, heavy feeling when I was in there, like I was being watched or something. I don't know what I saw that night, and I honestly don't care if people believe me or not. I know what I saw and experienced, and to this day I still get chills even thinking about it. I've obviously moved since then, but every now and then I get scared that something like that might happen again. It's a really daunting feeling to live with and something that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. So, has anyone ever experienced something similar to this? Or does anyone have any advice on how to deal with this kind of thing? Like I said, I still get freaked out sometimes when I think about it, and I really don't like to talk about it with anyone in my real life because it's just something that I know is hard to believe. This happened around 2022 to 2023-ish. So me and my boyfriend, we were living at my family's ancestral home in the Philippines. Our house is around 50 years old at this stage, and growing up, I had heard a lot of stories and folklores that surrounded our house, but I never really believed in them. Well, up until this incident anyway. So, it's almost midnight, and my boyfriend was already sleeping while I was watching YouTube on my phone. Our room is a rectangular room, and our bed is facing the windows. My boyfriend was already sleeping soundly while I was watching YouTube on the bed while facing against him. And all of a sudden, he just seemed to get mad at me for being too fidgety and said that he woke up because I was tapping his foot. I said to him that I wasn't doing anything, and not thinking much of it, I just said that maybe he was dreaming. I keep watching YouTube for another hour until eventually I fell asleep. At around 2 to 4 a.m., somewhere around there, I suddenly woke up and I was really confused because I thought that I was dreaming. You see, while I was looking around the room, I noticed that the right corner of our room was really dark, which was weird because our very flashy internet router was supposed to be there, and now it's just pure darkness. A darkness so dark that it was strange. I looked up at the corner waiting for my eyes to adjust until I saw a very tall shadow of a man. I was looking at him for almost 10 seconds without blinking or adjusting my eyes, just to make sure that I was seeing it correctly. The shadow of his head was almost at our ceiling, though. Again, thinking that I was dreaming, I just sort of tried to brush it off, and eventually I went back to sleep. The following morning, my boyfriend was so grumpy that he wasn't able to sleep much last night. Eventually, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back to bed, I said to him, "You know, I had a really weird dream last night. I woke up and looked here," I pointed at the corner, "and I saw and before I could finish, he said, 'You saw it too? The tall man?' I instantly had goosebumps because of what he said. I said to him that I saw it when I woke up in the middle of the night, and he said that he saw it when he woke up too and got mad at me because he felt tapping on his foot. He didn't say anything to me because he didn't want me to get scared and he wasn't sure what he was seeing too. Needless to say, we called a priest and had him bless our room and the whole house even. And after that, we didn't have any more incidences. This was about 15 years ago, and it has honestly traumatized me for that long. So I was playing Xbox in my room at night with my window down, and suddenly I got this cold ice feeling in my veins from my head to my toes in a sort of intense rush, and I was rendered completely paralyzed from fear. Literally out of nowhere too, this just hits me in my body, and I knew something was behind me outside my wide open window. And honestly, I had never been that scared in my life, since or even before that point. I knew deep down that I was being watched by something immediately. It felt evil, and I felt in danger beyond words to describe. Finally, I somehow got enough nerve to turn around, and I broke free from this paralyzing fear that was gripping my whole body, and spin around purposely avoiding looking out my window, dive into my bed, it being right below the same window. I hid under my blankets and was listening for anything that could tell me if there was something out there. I was confused and scared about what I was feeling and what was going on. After a few minutes of not hearing or seeing anything, I grabbed the windowsill and slowly peeked over and out of my window to see if I could see anything. At the time, I owned a PT Cruiser. It was parked outside about 15 feet away, directly adjacent from my window, and to my astonishment, this tall grey thing, it looked like it had a fuzzy-like static that clung to its entire body as well. It stood up and it turned its head in my direction, and it had no face at all, just completely flat and grey. It seemed as if it stood up from a crouched position behind my car. The top of the Cruiser was a little below the waist of this thing, so it was extremely tall, and it had really thin arms and legs, and they were long and skinny. I don't remember seeing any hands or anything because I was locked on its, faceless form, looking at me, and this static cloud kind of covered it, and made parts of it hard to see as well. Another weird characteristic was that it moved, and only when it moved it made a sound like rushing wind or a river rushing from a distance, almost like white noise, but really loud TV static noise with a wind sound. When it stopped moving, the sound would stop also, and it was a cold winter night with no wind and no sounds either, so because of that it stuck out and was super out of place sounding. This flat, faceless thing turned towards me, and I assume it was looking at me. Then, in the most robotic-looking way possible, its waist turned away from me, then its upper body, and then its head turned away last, and rushed into the darkness, into the field. And without skipping a beat in stride, it walked over a 5-foot cattle fence like it was nothing. As I mentioned before, it made this sort of rushing static wind sound the whole time. The static smoke that clung to its body became really static looking and like a heavy smoke. It trailed behind it and slowly fell to the ground and disappeared after a few seconds. It walked until the darkness seemed to swallow it up and I couldn't see it anymore, and it disappeared. The top of my PT was a little below its waist now. I've done some research on words and things like Naked Slender Man is the closest thing that I could compare it to. I know that it sounds crazy, but that's what I did. So, if anybody has seen something like this and can share their experience with me, I would really love to hear it. I've been fruitless in my search for other experiences or sightings of this thing with the same characteristics as mine. So if you have anything to share, then I would love to hear it. This experience scared the heck out of me so bad, and it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I was, for the first time in 11 years since that experience, actually able to go out into that field to shut the chickens in for the night. I just guess I really feel like I'm going to see this thing again, and when I do, that it's going to try and take me or something. I mean, the way that it looked at me the whole time as it turned to walk away wasn't a fleeing type of action. It's almost like it was like, oh yeah, just wait a little and I'll catch you next time sort of attitude as it walked away. Obviously, this whole thing sounds insane, but I can assure you that it really happened, and I know that it's straight out of like a Donnie Darko-like sort of thing, but it was weird, and I'm 30 now and I still haven't forgotten it. I was 14 or 15 at that time, and I still live in that same house to this day. As a kid, I was very bad with understanding social etiquette, or more specifically, I guess, how to not overshare or talk with strangers, no matter how many times my parents warned me. This happened possibly when I was around 8 to 9 years old, and prime for being overly talkative. My mum had brought me to McDonald's with her friend, who had a daughter, so that we could play in the indoor play place after eating. It was late at night. I don't remember why we were there so late or what we had done earlier that day, but the McDonald's was pretty much empty except for us and the staff, and the one man sitting alone at a table near the play area. It was late, and I don't remember why we were there so late or what we had done earlier that day, but the McDonald's was pretty much empty, except for us and the staff, and also one man sitting alone at a table near the play area. Of course, for whatever reason, little me, seeing a person alone, went up to him with my friend to start up a conversation. I introduced myself and her, started talking about my interests, my school, a lot of things that I don't really remember. I don't remember him replying either, but we eventually left him alone after he called someone on his phone or whatever, and started speaking in a different language. I didn't recognize it, and I don't remember it in enough detail to take a good guess now either. My friend and I, though, we kept playing until the man left. And then a few hours later, a big man and a young girl, roughly the same age as us, entered the McDonald's. The girl ran up to the glass dividing the counters from the play area and yelled my name excitedly. I went over despite not recognizing her. She started telling me a bunch of things about myself, implying that she knew me and I forgot her. She wanted me to come outside to hang out with her, and I realize now, as an adult, that the things that she was saying were the things that I had told the man on the phone. But I, oblivious and a naive child, was ready to go with her when my mother finally caught on and ran over to grab me. She dragged me out of the other exit to the car, and she was clearly terrified and stressed. I, on the other hand, was confused and was demanding why she wouldn't let me hang out with that girl. My mum wouldn't answer, and she tore out of the parking lot. The man with the little girl got in his own car from what we could see as we left and began chasing us. My mum went down several different roads away from our home until she finally lost them, and I was in serious trouble when I got home. She explained to me that this was most likely a kidnapping scheme, and I really needed to stop telling random strangers so much information about myself. I didn't understand how a little girl my age would be involved with kidnapping another kid, not to mention that I didn't understand the motivation of kidnapping at all either. But now that I get it, this was truly a horrifying situation that I just narrowly avoided, and if it wasn't for my mum, honestly, I don't know where I would be. I could have also potentially got my friend in trouble too, a lot of trouble. So I'm grateful for my mum that day, that she was vigilant, and that I also didn't get kidnapped, and who knows what would have happened. So, for some context, I had a really terrible childhood, to the point where I don't even remember anything from birth all the way to like 13 years of age. Everything that I do know about what happened through those years was from a mixture of sparse memories, things my family have told me about myself, and police reports. One of those things that I do remember, however, is this lady that I called Auntie. No first name, no last name, nothing else contributing to her identity. She was just Auntie. I started seeing her when I was about 7 years old, sitting in her living room as she typed everything that I said down on her laptop. I had no problem with her. I saw her once a month and she seemed gentle enough that I really thought that she was just someone that I could trust. So I did. 7 years later, 14 years old, I admitted to her that I tried to self-delete numerous times. It was a mixture of multiple different factors: my mother's increasing toxicity, the lack of social interaction at the time, and more importantly, I never moved on from the horrors of my childhood. Now, I was 14 years old at the time, and I was able to wonder why these meetings with Auntie never actually seemed to help me, especially to do with the fact that I begged her to tell me why I constantly wanted to end myself. And I remember on the way to Auntie's house one day, I asked my mother if I would ever get the chance to see a different person, maybe a different sort of help that Auntie clearly couldn't give. I was just hissed at to be quiet. Around that time too, the relationship between me and my mother began to crack a lot. My mother became a source of grief to me, and I cried about it during multiple sessions with my auntie. Auntie, at the end of these sessions, would try to defend my mother or make me seem like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I tried to come up with my own reasons at the time and why she was not trying to understand things wholly, and I just chalked it up to her being empathic. Maybe being able to explain why my mother was terrible was supposed to help me embrace it in some weird way or something. And then, more things like that seemed to happen. I admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a terrible kid. I went to parties, drank whatever was served, and definitely did not tell anyone what I was doing. But then Auntie started to ask very specific questions, especially to do with the topics I just mentioned. Quite honestly, I was sort of in shock, I guess. Again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and thought that her sudden pinpointing of these things must be from the fact that, at this point, she knows me for almost a decade and just knows these things. All the way into an entire year later, she started to bring up the parties that I've gone to in these sessions without even bothering to hide behind the questions. The relationship between me and my mother had almost been completely severed, and the worst part of all, something that still affects me to this day, at the end of each session, Auntie started to invite my mother into the room and tell her every single thing that I had said. It was terrible, hearing my own words against my mother, explaining the increasing abuse that she had begun to put me through and said straight to her face as she sat next to me. My grades in school began to drop. My mother forbade me from going out, and I was completely isolated. So again, self-deletion and all that. I ran into my mother's room looking for something that I could overdose with, or just something that could push me to the edge. I remember rummaging through everything until I went into her walk-in closet. I had barely gone into her room. In fact, I completely forgot about the fact that she had even had one of these. But in my crazed state, I just remember running into her closet and looking through every crevice when I stumbled upon a suitcase leaning against the wall under the hung-up clothes. If I close my eyes, I can still imagine it, and it didn't look old, so that was probably what made me decide to open it. And when I did, all I saw was just a ton of papers. The surprise of seeing so much snapped me out of the state that I was in, I guess, and I recall sitting cross-legged on the floor and wondering what the heck these papers were. After a while of reading, I realized that these were transcripts of Auntie and I's sessions, literally dating all the way back to some of the first sessions that I did with her. I remember feeling sick, feeling so sick at this. I at least had enough sense to steal a few of the earlier papers to make it less noticeable, and reading through those transcripts just filled me with more and more bitter questions. And so, I decided that night that I was going to end myself after I figured out what was going on. I was on a time crunch, feeling stressed because I really only had a year to figure out what the heck was going on before I was faced with the looming threat of being kicked out as soon as I turned 18. So I started to pay more attention in our sessions, looking around her house wherever I got the chance to, looking for some indicators that could tell me who this psychologist really was. I started asking my mother more and more questions about Auntie too. She kept deflecting though, repeating the same fact. She was a psychologist. That is, until I did something that literally almost ruined the rest of my life. I decided to steal my mother's phone. It seemed like a small thing now, but at that point it was really life or death. My mother was in the shower one day and I had already packed all the stuff that I needed to be out for a few hours, maybe even for a few nights somewhere. As soon as I heard the door lock, I swiped my mother's phone and bolted out of the house. I didn't even look down at the thing until I was on the bus, in fact. I remember looking through my mother's messages first, and I knew that I had found Auntie when I stumbled across an unfamiliar name. Even better when the messages clearly showed when my mother booked appointments too. I scrolled for a while, enough for the bus to get me to a safe place, but even as I walked off the bus and years of texts were read, nothing incriminating or anything of that effect had shown itself. I then looked through my mother's call logs and I saw the fact that they call extremely often. I was not an idiot too. Whatever was really going on was happening on calls instead of messages, which was smart. I'll give credit where credit is due, obviously, but it still didn't get me anything, and I was now a bit peeved. I found a place to sit at the side of the road, and I continued my search. I looked through my mother's social media, and when I tried searching up Auntie's name, nothing came up. I genuinely felt all the hope leave my body at that point, and sometimes now I swear that I can still feel the same sick feeling as I felt then. I almost gave up. Almost. And every day I thank myself for mindlessly swiping through my mother's followers because eventually I found her. Her account name didn't have her real name. It was some weird fake one, but when I clicked on her profile, it was definitely her. She posted photos with some of my mother's friends, and I scrolled for a while down her page until I saw a photo that I posted of herself and my mother years ago. I also found out that they had literally been friends before I was even born. I felt sick, betrayed, and a bit relieved that I now knew what the heck was going on. Why my mother had transcripts, why Auntie didn't think twice before telling my mother every single thing that I had said, why she defended her. I didn't even bother to find a place to stay that night. I just went back home. I got beat black and blue for doing something that I didn't deserve any forgiveness for, and it didn't hurt at all compared to what I found out earlier that day. All I asked my mother that night is, who is Auntie really? And she couldn't even answer that. A few years later, I was in a first year of university, and I had the lucky chance to move out of my mother's house as soon as I got the chance to. It was with an old friend taking pity on me and allowing me to stay with him since we applied to the same university. He's one of my best friends now, but what finally gave me closure in some sort of bittersweet way was clearing out my Instagram. I deleted people that I didn't care about or didn't know, but my heart dropped when I saw a familiar username in my followers. I didn't think about it at all when I searched up the username in the search bar, and when it came up with my auntie's Facebook account, my jaw dropped. This psycho had been following me for who knows how long on my Instagram, and suddenly everything that didn't click finally made sense. The sudden precise questions, why my mother suddenly decided to isolate me from my friends. It didn't even say psychologist or anything of the sort in her bio, and tell me why it said chemistry teacher with over 20 years. I admit that I cried like a baby that night because it had taken me years to finally understand why two of my main female models seemed to despise me. Still to this day, I mourn the fact that most of my early adult years are being used to heal from everything in my childhood, instead of going out with all of my newly made friends and giving my all to university. Genuinely, it sucks. Everyone who hears my life story too agrees on the fact that there's something wrong with them. I I just wish that I knew that sooner. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist, and trust me, I did my research this time. I felt almost ashamed too when I blurted out the reason why I'm sitting in this guy's chair like this. But he just smiled and told me that we had a lot of work to do. And yes, we do. I decided to share my experience just in the slight chance that anyone else has had a similar experience with therapy becoming messed up like this, or they feel like they've been living a whole other life their entire life. I promise you guys, it gets better, and with a little bit of luck and surrounding yourself with the right people at least, you might just get through. Anyway, that's my story, and obviously you'll need to fill in the gaps a little bit here, but I'm wishing you guys all of the best. So my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Ireland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, too, I went to go and stay with her for a couple of weeks at her granddad's house. And her granddad lives in rural Ireland, like really rural. The town is at least a 40-minute drive away, and his house is the only building within the area. It also backs onto a massive forest and faces onto a lake, too. It's really quite beautiful, to be honest, but that's not the point. You see, my best friend's granddad, brother, aunt, and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which was of course a tempting offer, but we declined as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves, something that doesn't happen a lot given that we were teenagers. So we decided to have a bit of a chill evening and basically play house. Of course, if you've been to Ireland, then you know that a quick pint is anything but quick. And her family, they had been gone for some time by this point, a few hours at least, when it was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We figured that maybe it was her family who had forgotten their keys, so we went to go and answer. Her granddad's front door led onto the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house, so we made it to the conservatory door expecting her family, but instead there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kind of just looked at him waiting for him to say something, during which I had time to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He sort of looked insane, bizarrely alert and yet slightly scary. It's sort of hard to explain, but he said that his car had broken down and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out but couldn't see a car anywhere and said something to the effect of, "Well, where's your car?" He responded by explaining that he had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked until he had found a house. Now, given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, this was sort of plausible. With slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said that he could call who he needed to call and wait on the doorstep. But he didn't accept the offer. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults or parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he was asking this as maybe he felt more comfortable sharing this predicament with adults rather than two teenage girls. But we didn't know if we should tell him that we were alone or not because we would usually know better than that, but given the situation, we explained that they were out but they may be back any minute now. It was then that he started to sort of look past us and into the house and then began insisting that we let him in the house as he wanted to use the landline. At this point, we were more than suspicious because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic all of a sudden, continuously insisting that we let him in. At that point, my friend said that he either use her mobile or that he needs to leave, but beyond that, there was nothing more that we could do for him. He again insisted that he come into the house, so we just shut the door on him, locked it, and then locked the door to the actual house as well. Freaked out, we sat in her living room trying to peep out the window and see if he had gone. He lingered for a little bit, looking into the windows, maybe looking for a way in, I suppose, but then we saw him leave. though we couldn't make out what direction that he actually went in. We were now pretty terrified, and to add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other, and she had never seen him in her life, which scared her as she was acquainted with most of the town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we decided to just leave it and continue on with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless and her family was still out, so we let her into the back garden, and after about 5 minutes we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to more than likely being a goat because that was usually the case. We called her in and we just went about our night. We realized that her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours, and instead of waiting for them, we decided to head up to bed. I went into the kitchen, which is at the back of the house, to get some water when I heard someone shaking the handle of the back door, trying to get in. The thing is that it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith in the door holding up against the weight of what I expected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder, and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point, he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to you that I felt my heart fall out of my butt. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she had taken our phones upstairs, but she thought that it may deter him. And luckily, this seemed to finally scare him off. He stopped banging and we heard his footsteps move further and further away until we couldn't hear them anymore. We were literally frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and we pretty much thought that that was it for us. On instinct, my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry, and you can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad call out for us saying that they were back. We were absolutely dazed, and I'm sure that they could tell, so we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here, or a broken car, or whatever?" And they responded that they didn't, and I swear to you that I nearly defecated myself just then and there. We never did find out who that man was. The guys went out and took a look around, but they never found anything. And while I don't know everything about what was going on, obviously, one thing was for certain. He was trying to get into this place, and he definitely did not have good intentions. When I was 13 years old, I went camping with my school at some point. When I arrived, I noticed the camping spot was just some tents in a dark and creepy forest. The tents were also small, and we even had to share a tent with 12 other people. I liked the activities that we did. We built a boat, we played football, and we roasted marshmallows around a campfire. When it was time for sleeping, I chose the bed all the way at the back. I opened my suitcase and realized I did not bring my pajamas. So I slept with my normal clothes on for the next 3 to 4 hours. Until I was awoken by a loud rumbling noise. I slowly turned around and 2 tall creatures hunched over my suitcase. They were searching for something, I thought. I reached my arm out to touch whoever this person was, and I felt something harsh. If I were to describe it, I would say that it felt something like old wood. After I had touched it, though, I asked who it was, and then I just sort of blacked out. In the morning, I was woken up by my alarm on my phone. We were not allowed to bring a phone, so I was sure that I had turned my alarm off before sleeping. So how could this have happened? I asked myself many questions. I know that it wasn't the other kids. I had not even told them that I had my phone with me, neither did I know them well, but they didn't seem like jokesters to me. My alarm woke up most of the kids in the tent. They asked whose it was, so I acted just like I was sleeping to avoid being suspected. We had to wake up at around this time anyway, so I jumped out of bed and I walked outside. It was really cold and I really had to pee at this stage. I walked around the tent and I peed in the bushes. I turned around and I saw a dead rabbit right outside of where I slept. I called the teacher and he told me that it must have been killed by something, and he said that he could call staff to clean it up if I wanted. This day was not really that interesting. I mostly just sort of laid in bed eating candy and thinking about what happened that night. It quickly turned to dark and we roasted some more marshmallows and we ate some pasta that night. The pasta was actually cold and stale, but I was hungry, so I didn't care that much. 1 hour later, and it was almost bedtime, and my teacher had told me that if I wanted to go to the bathroom at night, I would have to go in a duo because the forest is very dangerous at night. I didn't think too much of it, but I chose my duo just to be sure. And it was bedtime, and I made my bed, and eventually I fell asleep. Again, though, I was woken up, but this time not by weird creatures, but by my urge to pee, and so I tried waking up my duo, but he just didn't want to wake up. So in the end, I decided to go alone. I walked all the way out to the front of the tent, waking some up in the process, and I walked out. It was cold and really dark at this stage. In fact, I could barely see. I looked over to the benches, and there it was again, looking at me. It was tall, and it seemed to have something in its hands. It looked like an animal, but I was stood still looking at it for maybe about 20 seconds until I decided to just continue walking to the toilets. I opened the toilet door and I did my business. I washed my hands and I left. And when I returned back at the benches and looked again, the creature was now gone. I don't know what it was, but no one else seemed to have seen it, only me. If anyone knows what this could have been, then please do tell me, because I genuinely have no idea. I'm going to try to explain this as short and as best as I can. To give some context, I've experienced sleep paralysis many times in my life, and it's always been very simple. I wake up, can't move, can't speak, and can only watch what's happening around me with my eyes. The first time that I had sleep paralysis was when I was 13 or 14. It was just a shadow hovering behind me, which I could see in the mirror that I fell asleep facing. It had no distinct features, just a shadow. So skipping forward, I'm 18 now. I still have sleep paralysis here and there, but have not seen the shadow since I was 14. This past weekend, me and my boyfriend went down to this friend's house. They always tell me about crazy paranormal and scary stuff that they've experienced, so obviously I've decided to bring my Ouija board. I've had it for about a year, but it has yet to do anything, so I kind of just started to doubt it was real and hung it on my wall. It was about midnight-ish, and we went walking on the train tracks near his house. Decided to stop by a little ghost town because he lives basically in the middle of nowhere, and pulled out the Ouija board. It was only me and my boyfriend's friend with our hands on the planchette. Trust me too, I know the first mistake, but I genuinely started to doubt that Ouija boards were real even. But basically, to sum it up, I asked the basic question, are there any spirits who would like to communicate with us? To then I get a response, GETO, or get ow. Me and my boyfriend's friend and I panicked and said goodbye before we even got the last 2 letters because we knew exactly what it was saying. And that was the second mistake. We practically ran back to his house and went on with our night, and I was still extremely skeptical and thought that maybe it was probably his friend, but there was not really any way that I could prove that. Well, the next night I'm at home completely alone. I'm laying in bed and praying and accidentally drifted off before I finished praying, which I then experienced sleep paralysis. And it is the shadow that I saw when I was 14. But this time it has eyes and it's closer. All I remember from it is that it was leaning over to get closer to my face and I was freaking out. Now, the part where I get confused is this wasn't normal sleep paralysis, I guess you could say. I was flailing around and begging for it to let me wake up. I woke up and just kind of said to myself, well, that was weird, and man do I hate sleep paralysis, and eventually went back to sleep. about 45 minutes ago, I woke up from another one though, and it was this one that was truly horrifying. So I was praying before I fell asleep again, and again accidentally drifted off before I finished praying. I woke up and it was this thing again. It was in the same spot as last time, but this time it started trying to get near my ears, and I was literally pushing and kicking this thing away from me until it stopped, and it was trying to talk to me. It then told me that it was keeping me there forever. I'm assuming in whatever realm that I was in, whether it was a sleep realm or something evil or whatever, but I was crying and begging for it to let me wake up. I kept telling it that I had work in the morning and I couldn't stay there forever. I told it that if it let me wake up tonight, that it could come back tomorrow, and that was when I woke up. And this is where I need some help. Honestly, I'm seriously horrified by whatever this is. It doesn't feel like sleep paralysis anymore, and it felt real, and I was able to move. The only thing is that I don't know if I was moving in real life or just in my head, because I'm alone and obviously I was asleep, I guess you could say. I explained this to my boyfriend and he told me that it could be night terrors, but he's really not sure either, because since this weekend, he has also been having vivid nightmares, which is a really weird coincidence, right? I really don't know if this is sleep paralysis, a night terror, a very realistic nightmare, or if it really is something evil. I'm just afraid because I told whatever it was that it could come back tomorrow night, and I'm really scared that it actually will, and I won't be able to wake up at all. This happened to me a few weeks ago on a warm night when I decided to go for a walk in the forest to my favorite clearing. It's a beautiful spot, located on a hill with an amazing view over a field and off into the distance. I've even watched a few sunsets there, and it has always been one of my go-to places. There's also a campfire there as well, which seems to be used occasionally by other people. I left my apartment around 10 o'clock and I headed toward the forest. The night was pitch black, but I chose not to use a light. I'm really not sure why I chose that, but maybe I just didn't want to attract attention and preferred to enjoy the quiet warmth of the evening alone. Whatever the case, as I walked, I passed an old farm next to the road leading to the clearing. The road itself connects to another town nearby, and I had passed that farm many times before, and I had never seen any animals, people, or cars around it. It always seemed to be abandoned to me, but that night was different. So as I walked past it, an unmistakable farm animal smell hit me, something that I had never experienced there before. It was that sort of typical earthy, musky scent that you get when animals are around. If you know, you know, but instinctively I looked around hoping to spot something in the darkness, but just as always, the place was completely empty. No animals, no signs of life, nothing except the strong smell lingering in the air. I found that a bit strange, but I shook it off and I continued walking. Soon I reached the clearing and I sat next to the campfire, ready to stargaze. That was my whole purpose for coming, and I wanted to lie under the sky and take in the stars a bit. When I inspected the campfire, I noticed that beneath the ash there were some embers still glowing. There was also firewood stacked nearby, left by whoever had been there before. So I decided to rekindle the fire using the leftover wood, and soon I was lying on the ground next to it, just sort of stargazing and watching up in the night sky. For a couple of hours until midnight, I enjoyed the peaceful night too. But eventually I ran out of firewood. I didn't feel like venturing into the woods for more either, so I let the fire die out and I allowed myself to drift into the quiet darkness. But then, like out of nowhere, suddenly I hear footsteps. They were coming toward me from the gravel road, loud and distinct in the silent night. The fire had burned out completely and the moon was dim, leaving everything in near total darkness at this stage. I couldn't see them, and obviously they couldn't see me, but As I lay there on the ground, hidden by the darkness, I listened closely and tracked their movement by sound alone. As the footsteps passed me, I got up and I started following them. It wasn't strange to me at the time. I was heading home, and they just so happened to be going in the same direction toward my town. If anything, I felt a strange sense of advantage that they didn't know that I was there, but I knew about them. Their footsteps remained steady, crunching over the gravel, and I could hear my own footfalls joining theirs. But then, all of a sudden, without warning, their footsteps just vanished. Gone. I stopped, confused. I didn't really think much of it at first and continued down the road, passing the farm again, but something nagged at me, so I paused, turned around and waited, expecting to see someone emerge from the darkness behind me. Maybe I had somehow passed them without noticing. In the near-total darkness of the forest, after all, it was possible, but no one ever came out. I stood there for quite some time too, staring into the darkness, waiting for a moment, a sound, anything, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling in the trees, no sign of anyone. And that's really when I became unsettled the most. If it had been a person walking ahead of me, they wouldn't have known that I was there, which means that if they suddenly heard another set of footsteps behind them, it could have startled them for sure, and if they had jumped off the road onto the forest to hide or escape, there should have been some noise, branches snapping or leaves rustling or something, but there was nothing. I didn't think about it too deeply until a few days later when I replayed the whole scenario in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the stranger the whole situation becomes. Really, I'm not sure what to make of it, but that's why I'm here. I would really love it if you guys could help me figure this one out. Were those just a couple of people walking out in the night like me, or was there something else going on? Also, I should probably mention too that the next day when I went back, I could clearly see my footsteps. You could see the imprint of my shoe and all, but there were no other footprints anywhere. I don't know. The whole situation is weird, and I would love your input. I'd like to start off by saying that this story isn't mine, but rather something that supposedly happened to a friend of mine, whom I have since lost contact with. I had known her for several years when she told me this story, and it was the only strange or paranormal tale that she ever told me. And so, as you can imagine, it's always had a bit of a ring of truth with me. Anyway, around 2004, she lived with her parents in a wooded area of Ontario, Canada. Their backyard, it had a handful of fruit trees, and a thick forest began where their backyard ended. And one night, her father was climbing the stairs to go to bed when he happened to look out the window towards the fruit trees. Apparently, a bluish-white light caught his eye, meandering amongst their fruit trees. It wasn't particularly bright, but not dim either. It supposedly drifted freely around 3 feet off the ground. Thinking that it was a prowler with a flashlight, he readied himself for a confrontation. But as he looked closer, he realized that this light wasn't coming from a flashlight. It was just a ball of light floating around the trees, as my friend described it. Her dad calls for the family to come and see. They joined him at the window, bewildered at what the ball of light was. Dad decided to go and get a closer look, but as soon as he opened the door, the light retreated to the thicker forest beyond their yard, weaving through the fruit trees as it moved without a sound. Creeped out, my friend and her mum went back upstairs to go to bed, trying to put it out of their minds. Her dad, though, he stayed up a bit longer, staring at the window, mesmerized, watching as this light returned to their yard and just floated around. Eventually, it drifted back into the forest and disappeared. The following morning, my friend woke up to their father shouting in a panic. He had gone blind overnight. Her and her mum rushed him to the hospital where the doctor examined him. The doctor told them that he typically only sees this kind of retinal burn from people welding without a mask. It was determined that her father's blindness was thankfully temporary and should pass within a couple of days. I should add too that her father was definitely not a welder, but rather worked in an office. As I said before, I have since lost contact with this friend, but as of our last conversation, the source of light, it was never determined. I moved into my childhood home when I was 2 with my mum and my dad. Throughout my life, my mother has always said that she believes that there was a ghost in the house, but I always just kind of brushed it off, I guess. It's not that I don't believe in the paranormal, but the things that she would experience just wasn't anything for me to bat an eye at, I guess. Sort of like hearing footsteps or hearing silverware move in our kitchen, etc. But one day, a couple of years ago, back when I was a freshman in high school, I played on my high school hockey team, and one day I had a really late game and I didn't arrive home with my dad until about 10 p.m. My mother was working that day. She worked as a bartender at the time, so she normally wouldn't get home from work until like 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. But me and my dad, we came home to an empty house as per usual. Pretty much every day he goes outside into our backyard to smoke a cigar, and that night it was the same routine. And as soon as we got into the house and as he was getting ready to head out back, I told him that I was going to head into the shower, so that's what I did. I had a dog at the time, a small one, but she was outside with my dad during this time, so I'm just doing my stuff in the shower. I'm in there, I would say, for about maybe 5 minutes. My shower is located on the top floor of my house, then downstairs is the kitchen, and then I have a basement. And all of a sudden I heard 3 clear loud knocks on my bathroom door, about a couple of seconds apart from each other. I sort of stop what I'm doing and sit there and listen. I say hello, thinking that it was my father, but I get no reply. No sounds, not anything. Now, the thing with my house is that it's really creaky, so even when the shower is on, I can hear my downstairs basement door open and close, and you could hear someone walking up the stairs right outside the bathroom door even. But I heard nothing before or after the knocking. So, to be honest, I really just didn't think too much of it. I was a little bit freaked out, I'll admit, but I chose to just sort of forget about it in the moment. I continue in my shower, and another about, I would say 2 minutes passes by, when I hear the same 3 knocks on the door again. Weirdly too, it sounded the same as the first time, like identical. Now, I'm definitely scared, so I proceed to yell, "Is anyone there?" And once again, I receive nothing. So, with the shower still running, I get out of the shower and open my bathroom door to see nobody. No one going down the stairs or anything. I walk out of the bathroom and check all the rooms up there, and I don't see anything. I look out of my bedroom window and I see clearly my dad sitting outside, so I brush it off again and tell myself that I'm just going to finish my shower and get out of the bathroom as quickly as I can. I go back into the bathroom, and as soon as I get into the shower, the same 3 knocks happen one more time. At this point, I am absolutely terrified. I turn the shower right off, and I open the bathroom door again to reveal nothing. Now, at this point, I go outside to ask my dad if he went inside at all, and he said that he hasn't. And genuinely I believe him, because usually I would be able to hear him if he came inside the house again. And to this day, this is the freakiest thing that has ever happened to me in my house. One more odd thing too to add is that this was my first real encounter, I guess you could say, with this possible ghost in my house, but I have one more thing to share. You see, a couple of months after the shower incident, I'm sitting in bed at about 12 a.m. I had just gotten off my phone with my friends, and my parents are sleeping in their bedroom 2 rooms away from me on the 2nd floor of my house. I'm laying in my bed on my phone, just scrolling through YouTube and whatnot. One side of my bed is directly up against my 2 windows, by the way, and the other side is near my bedroom door. So I'm just sort of laying there, and suddenly I hear a distinct loud knock on the window right above my head. I stood up terrified and tried to look out the window, but it was way too dark to see anything. One knock and that was all. Nothing else happened that night besides that. I'm still kind of confused by these weird encounters to this day, and I have moved out of my parents' house about 2 years ago now, so nothing else has clearly happened since then, but after those experiences I lived there for a few more years and nothing of that extent happened since. I have heard footsteps and things moving when I've been home alone, but really nothing like that. So my uncle, a wallpapering expert, and my father, a skilled carpenter, teamed up for a project one day, an old white Victorian house nestled in the quiet seclusion of rural Connecticut. For my 13-year-old self and my 11-year-old cousin, this was more than just a renovation project. It was an open invitation to explore our fascination with the supernatural. This particular house, it felt like hitting the jackpot too. The property sprawled across several acres, boasting a built-in greenhouse. Further out, a dilapidated shed leaned at the yard's edge, where the forest began. Even without any ghost stories, the entire scene possessed a certain eerie charm, which is a quality often found in the old homes of the East Coast, to be honest. Left to our own devices, we approached the back of the house at the kitchen entrance. A basement door loomed wide open by the entrance with an immediate unwelcome vibe. A certain scent settled over me, a feeling that something resided here and it wasn't exactly good. Despite the thrill of quenching my curiosities, the urge to remain in the yard for the rest of the afternoon was almost overwhelming. But my cousin, well, he was too bold for this. As we ventured deeper into the house, a profound dread came over me, each step feeling heavier than the last. My body seemed to resist the house almost. My cousin, meanwhile, was claiming to hear things and became fixated on exploring the attic. Honestly, I was already beyond done with this place though at this stage. Even my 13-year-old brain registered that this was not a good place. All I wanted to do was go and sit in the car, and that was that. But we made our way up to the attic, and to my relief, it had been renovated. Despite the lingering unease, it wasn't the least bit creepy visually, which was a relief. There was even a small TV, which I turned on, sitting on the floor in front of it. But my cousin's attention was snagged by a closed door. He stood there before it, completely still, gaze fixed. Now, this was an 11-year-old who is usually a whirlwind of energy, constantly talking or making sounds, so their sudden silence spoke volumes. I tried to ignore it, but then they grabbed the knob and began yanking on it, but the door wouldn't budge. So logically, it was likely an unfinished storage area. The wood was probably swollen shut from moisture or whatever, and looking back now, though, I think that maybe I was wrong. I stood up to help them, and the door was genuinely jammed, but they became almost frantic, and their insistence on opening it was bordering on aggression. It was super disturbing to see them like this. I started pulling with all my strength, and the door finally gave way with a strong burst. I fell backwards, still gripping the doorknob, as a sudden, powerful gust of wind swept over us, whipping our hair back. My cousin screamed, a sound of pure terror, frozen in place, eyes wide. By the time that I regained my balance and rushed to see what they were seeing, there was nothing. But I swear the sheer terror was real from them. And this particular room was the true attic as well, unfinished with splintered wood, random old antiques scattered about, and a grimy old window. Upon looking in, an intense wave of nausea suddenly hit me. I instantly slammed that door without even a second thought. A primal fear suddenly surged through me, and I immediately scooped my cousin and bolted down the stairs, out of that house and into that yard. And up to this day, even now, they won't tell me what they saw. They just laugh it off and change the subject, really. And it leaves me constantly questioning, was that terror just a figment of my overactive imagination? Or was it something tangible? The feeling was so intense, so visceral, that it made me feel physically ill. I don't know the history of the house, but deep down in my soul, I feel that something truly awful must have happened there. In the summer of 2023, I was camping with my family in Beaver Creek Campground in Montana for a few nights while visiting Yellowstone. And the first night there was the most unsettling experience that I have ever had. So my mother, stepfather, and his brother, they had all gone to sleep at around midnight while I stayed up for about an hour by the fire. It was pitch black when I decided to snuff the fire out and head to my tent to sleep for the night. After about 20 minutes of laying in my tent, I began to hear sniffing noises immediately outside of my tent. Fearing that it was a bear, I was completely frozen. This continued for a while until I heard the familiar breathing and shaking noises of that of a dog. I relaxed a bit, supposing that a nearby camper's dog had wandered off or something. I stopped hearing the dog after a while, but then I heard footsteps walking around our campsite, and the sound of a large stick being dragged along the ground all around. I was frozen in fear again at the possibility of a stranger walking around our campsite in pitch-black darkness. Suddenly, though, an obvious camera flash had gone off right in front of my tent. I was frozen, solid in fear. Later, it felt as though an animal or a person had laid down or cradled the corner of my tent as well. I felt a presence for maybe about 5 minutes and kept feeling as if something was lightly fidgeting with the corners of the tent. Still frozen, I prayed for this to stop. But then I was forced to make this person, or whatever, acknowledge my awareness of the situation when I sensed another's touch on the zipper of my tent door. I called out loudly, "Who's there?" My stepdad awoke and called out to me while I was too afraid to open my door. 10 seconds passed when I knew that he was out of his tent with his gun, and then I finally emerged. However, there was nothing there, and after I called out, I didn't hear or sense any movement going away from the campsite. All the while, too, my mum and stepdad have a dog in their tent which reacted to nothing the whole time. Well, that was enough for me. I slept in the car the next 2 nights, and thankfully nothing else happened. But I'm here to ask you guys if anyone has had any weird encounters like this in Montana near Yellowstone, or just in general, really. Thanks for listening to my story, and if you have any idea about what any of this could have been about, then please do share. This happened at my sister's house in 2019. For context, my sister had just bought this house and moved in. I invited a friend to stay with me in the guest room for my first night in her house as well. Her name is Anna, and the guest room had a trundle bed underneath a single bed. I was sleeping on the single bed, and Anna was sleeping on the trundle bed just below, but right next to me. Now, to paint a bit of a picture, the guest room was a standard square shape. The trundle bed was right up on the right wall. There was one window in the middle of the room that overlooked the driveway in the front yard as well, but there was enough space to roll the trundle bed out and not to have to stand on the mattress to see out the window. The curtains were a sort of tulle fabric that let some light in as well. Now, I'm a very light sleeper in new places, and I know that I woke up because I sensed this presence was in the room. I opened my eyes to see Anna staring at the window, curtains half open. There was plenty of moonlight to see her, and she was standing still, staring straight forward. Her face was only 4 inches from the glass at this stage, and the first thing that I noticed was just how rigid she seemed with her arms by her sides. Now, I wasn't paralyzed, and in the moment I just sort of woke up and was looking at my friend. Nothing to be scared of, right? I propped my upper body up with my elbow in bed to get a vertical look at her. There was enough light to see her freckles clearly, and I asked what she was doing. but she didn't answer me. I said, "Anna, what are you doing?" And then she replied, "Who?" in a flat, low, but still feminine voice. I repeated, "Anna, what are you doing?" She again said, "Who?" in the same way. And this is where fear finally set in. Up until now, I was using an unfazed voice. I got that uncanny valley feeling as I was staring at her, though, and after that eerie feeling set in, I looked down at the trundle bed, and I saw Anna asleep below me. I was looking at Anna sleeping while Anna was standing right next to herself. And when I tell you that my stomach dropped, that is an understatement. My heart began racing, and I looked back and up and said, "Anna," one more time. This time, this thing snapped its head toward me so fast. We locked eyes, and I just shouted, "What the heck?" as I hurled myself against the wall. After I yelled and jostled the bed, Anna finally woke up. The real Anna, that is. She muttered, "What are you doing?" This made me look down at her, and once I looked back up at her, the fake one had vanished. I checked the time, and it was 2:40 in the morning, and I just said, "What the heck was that?" I explained what I saw to Anna, and I got up and reenacted it for her and shut the curtains. She doesn't like me bringing it up, and look, I get it. I wouldn't like hearing that sort of entity was standing right next to me too and wearing my face like that. But it was exactly her. When we locked eyes, hers were so empty and cold though. I can never forget those eyes, and I truly believe that this was not sleep paralysis. I mean, I was fully awake and processing. Whatever happened, it was real. I don't think it was a fabrication made by my brain either. I mean, I'm perfectly sane, never had any mental health issues or anything. In 2009, the thought of an entity that takes the face of a loved one was not something that I even knew about, in fact. I still don't really know too much or anything really. I just don't like remembering those eyes, and I'm a believer and a fan of the paranormal for sure, but this was frightening. I suppose I would like to know what it is, but I also don't want it to come back, so yeah. Thanks for listening, and here's hoping that I never have to experience anything like that again. So I'm male and 29, and this happened to me and my then girlfriend. It was the middle of July in 2011. I was a 15-year-old teenager, completely clean from any alcohol, drugs, or anything like that. In fact, I was very athletic at the time and loved sports. I would even describe myself as a pretty responsible and grounded kid for my age. That summer, though, like every year, I was spending my vacation at my grandparents' village, a small place of around 400 people. There were always kids to play with, and we would stay out together from afternoon until sometimes around 2 or 3 in the morning. My grandparents gave me a freedom that I never had with my parents. In their backyard, there were 2 houses as well, and one was built by my great-grandparent, was over 100 years old. The other newer one, though, was built by my grandfather. That summer, for the second year in a row, I decided to live by myself in the old house, and my grandparents stayed in the other one for the time being. During the day, I helped my grandfather with farm work. We had a sort of small farm there. A lot of hard work, and in the evenings I went out with friends and came back whenever I wanted. Honestly, it felt like absolute freedom, and I loved it. At that time, I also had a girlfriend from my school back in the capital city. I was deeply in love, and it was my first love, full of innocent excitement. We talked on the phone daily. And one night, a big summer storm was approaching. The village lost power, no lights, no street lamps, complete darkness. It started pouring and thundering so hard that there was no way anyone could go outside. It was around 11 o'clock when I decided to go to bed. Outside, the storm was so fierce that the thunder made my bed shake, and it was really windy the whole evening. Surprisingly, I fell asleep pretty quickly that night. Now, the next thing that I remember was waking up to the sound of my phone ringing, a Nokia 6303 next to me. When When I opened my eyes, what I noticed first was that the storm had completely passed. Clear sky, calm air, the streetlights were back on. I looked at my phone and it showed my girlfriend's name. I answered the call, put the phone to my ear while laying down, closed my eyes, and we started talking, greeting each other and asking what the other was doing. I remember feeling extremely sleepy, and very shortly after answering, maybe 10 to 20 seconds after that, I must have fallen asleep because, honestly, I remember nothing else. Anyway, the next morning I woke up normally. While sitting on the toilet, I remember, oh yeah, she called me last night. Curious about what we talked about too, I checked all of my call history. I received a call at 12:26 a.m., lasting exactly 1 minute and 35 seconds. I thought, that's pretty odd, and immediately called her to ask what we had talked about after these first 10 to 20 seconds of conversation because I couldn't remember anything else. At first, she laughed, thinking that I was joking. "What do you mean you don't remember? And what 1 minute and a half are you talking about?" she asked. I explained that according to my call log, our conversation lasted only about 1 minute and 35 seconds. Then she got quiet for a moment. "And that's all you remember?" she asked again. She said that after she first called me, we talked for about a minute or so, during which I told her that my phone battery was dying and that I'd call her back using my cousin's phone, since we were supposedly together at that time. She agreed, and we intentionally ended the call, and about 20 seconds later, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, it was apparently me again, or it sounded exactly like me. And she says that we talked for 45 minutes straight. I apparently told her that it was my cousin's phone and that she could save the number. We talked about personal things only she and I knew. I acted completely normal, using familiar names and references. Nothing felt off to her. She said that there was no way that she could mistake my voice. We were in love and spoke to each other daily at this stage. Plus, no random stranger could possibly have known that much about us, right? Well, near the end of the 45 minutes, she says that my mood had suddenly changed, and I ended the call just sort of abruptly. Right after, she received a text from the same unknown number that said, "I love you, little mouse. Everything's fine and we'll talk tomorrow. Sweet dreams," and then a heart emoji. We had specific nicknames for each other, and I never in my life called her Little Mouse before. She found it strange, but also kind of sweet, and just sort of brushed it off. And when she told me all of this, for a second I was sitting there, just mouth wide open. Then I laughed, and I didn't believe it. I was alone at the house that night. There was a storm, no electricity, and I had gone to sleep early. My cousin wasn't even at the village at the time. I couldn't believe her at first, and I thought that she was genuinely messing with me, but when I returned to the city a week later and we met up, she showed me her call history. First call, 1 minute and 35 seconds, just like it was on mine. And then the second call was an in-call from an unknown number, about 45 minutes long. Then a minute later, this same text message from an unknown number. Well, we decided to call the strange number from her phone, but I was going to do the speaking. A man answered almost immediately, a complete stranger, sounded maybe in his mid-30s to us, and he told us that he was living in the capital with his family. He was very cooperative when we explained the situation briefly. He said that he had no idea who we were, had never called or texted my girlfriend's number, and when he checked his outgoing messages, there was also no record of the text that we received. My girlfriend swore, though, that she didn't recognize this guy's voice at all. We didn't want to keep him long, so we just said thanks and we ended the call. Afterward, we just sort of sat on the park bench, completely freaked out, speechless for minutes. Neither of us could explain what had happened. Years later, we went our separate ways, each now with families and children even. But even now, 14 years later, when we see each other, we sometimes still talk about that night. how we felt and the storm that took place, and the most bizarre thing that she was talking with me for almost an hour, but it wasn't me. We never found a satisfying explanation for this too, and we're still just very perplexed by it. We speculated that maybe it was some kind of a cell network glitch or something, some weird signal crossover or whatever, but even then, how did the stranger or whatever was speaking have all the personal details to carry a 45-minute conversation like this? How did a text message get sent from somebody else's number without him even knowing it? Nothing like this has ever happened again, but it is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. So if anyone here has experienced something similar, or has any idea of what could have happened, I would love to hear your thoughts and theories. It's the first time I've shared this with anyone else, and so I'm a little bit nervous about this, but I thought that I would put it out there and see what other people's opinions may be. This happened back when I was 13. Me, my mum, my sister, and brother decided to go on a vacation in Morocco. At first, we wanted to rent an apartment for ourselves, but my grandma who lives there invited us to stay at her 70-year-old home. Me and my siblings hesitated a bit because we had heard stories about what happened in that home. Faint voices, footsteps, etc., etc. My mum changed our mind though and brushed the stories off. She claimed that they were lies just to scare us, and we told her that if we experienced something creepy that we would immediately leave the house and stay at our aunt's house. But for now, the vacation had started. We went to the beach nearly daily, we went shopping and bought a lot of souvenirs, and we chilled at the house a bit. And one night, we tried to sleep, but it was way too hot. Temperatures were around 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. So we decided to sleep on the roof. It's not really a roof though, it's more like an open roof room at the top of the house. We cleaned the floor first though and laid down on the mattresses and the blankets there. My brother fell asleep first, then my sister, and at last myself. I slept quite well for a couple of hours. There was a slight breeze and it was quiet, until the silence was broken by someone calling my name. It was a soft and soothing voice. I slowly opened my eyes and stood up to walk to the door. I first answered with a "Yes, who's calling my name?" to no reply. Then I walked to the stairs and leaned over the railing to look down, and what I saw, I have never told another soul. I looked down and saw a girl in a white dress looking back up at me, but her neck was way too elongated for her to be human. Then the girl just sort of turned around and walked away until I couldn't see her anymore. Well, I decided to quickly shut up and try to get some sleep and to go back where others were, but I couldn't. I don't know who that was, and I was starting to believe in the rumors about this house at this stage. Recently, my grandma told me about a 12-year-old girl that had apparently ended her own life by jumping off the roof there or something that we were sleeping on. I was genuinely shocked and was 100% sure that the girl that I had encountered that day was the one who had done it. It was a very frightening experience and something that I will never forget. I live in Ohio, a rural community, and this happened in the early 1990s. My girlfriend and I were at a local nature area. There's a small fish pond there, county roads to the north and east, woods to the west and the south. My truck was facing kind of northeast, I guess. It was near dusk, and we were sitting on the tailgate of my truck just talking, listening to music and all that. There were a few other people at the park at that time, and as time went on, other cars left the park and it started getting darker. The mosquitoes were getting pretty bad, so we decided to get into the truck. We sat there a little while longer. Radio was on, but low volume as we continued talking. We were just sort of getting to know each other, so there was a lot to talk about at the time. When we both heard a sound, like a thumping or a banging sound coming from the wooded area, but it seemed far away. I turned off my truck radio and we just listened. Some dogs were barking in the distance, but we didn't hear anything else out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off, turned my radio back on, and we just went about our business. I should say here too that my truck ignition was off. It was just an accessory to run the radio really, so no engine noise and no headlights. After a few minutes, we hear a similar sound again. Same response, turned off the radio and just listened, but nothing. I decided to just leave the radio off at this point. We were talking about getting ready to head out and go into town anyway. But then, and I'll describe this as best as I can, things went wild. A sound that I can only describe as a choir of voices suddenly started. There was what sounded like stringed instruments replicated by a pipe organ. The voices were chanting words, but I can't tell you what language it was. I didn't recognize any of the words, but it was an ominous, very unsettling chanting in a higher register. And it sounded as if the sounds were coming from, well, every direction. It was in no way a pleasant sound. It instantly filled me with fear and dread because it felt evil. It was as if the truck was surrounded too, and I quickly reached and started my truck and turned on the headlights, fully expecting to see a ring of robed figures surrounding us. As unlikely and crazy as that sounds, that is what my thoughts were preparing for based on what we were hearing. I have a hard time sharing just how intense the sound of the chanting was, but it sounded close, like they were right outside of the windows. But as soon as the headlights came on, there was just, well, silence. Nothing. Nothing running away, no sound other than my engine. Everything was completely normal. Without saying anything, I put it into drive and we tore out of the parking area and we headed south. Once we got away from there, we recounted what had just happened. Neither of us had an explanation, but agreed on one thing. It was, without a doubt, the most frightening and unexplainable thing that we had ever experienced. I guess I'm not looking for an explanation. I realize how fantastical this sounds, but every word of it is true. I shared what happened with a couple of my friends the next day, but it's a story that I've pretty much kept to myself over the years, sharing only with a few people that would appreciate it. This took place back in 2019 when I was 11. My grandparents live in a large Victorian-styled home on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The building was made in the late 1800s, so it has that classic old building look to it. Me and my family go down there occasionally from our home up near Bellingham, Washington, and in early September of that year, my family decided that they wanted to pay my grandparents a visit. I was excited to see my grandparents, but not so much to go to the house. Up until that point, nothing out of the ordinary had happened in that house. The only thing it did was creep me out, especially if I was alone. The first day that we were there, though, nothing really out of the ordinary happened. My grandparents and I did our annual game of Clue, a murder mystery board game. We enjoyed dinner, and that was basically about it. Little did I know, though, that when I went to sleep that night, that tomorrow would be anything but ordinary. When I got up the next day, I was excited because I was a die-hard Seahawks fan, and today was going to be their first game of the season. Outside it was warm and muggy, so in my room, which was one of the 2 rooms on the 3rd floor, I had the window open with the fan on to let all the hot air out. Later that day, my dad came up to my room and said that he and everyone else was going to go on a walk. I acknowledged him by nodding, glued to the Seahawks game that was on my tablet screen. He then left and shut the door behind him. And what happens next still terrifies me to this day. About 10 minutes later, I heard what I thought to be my mum yelling from downstairs, somewhat annoyed. I stood up and turned the fan off next to the window, so as to listen if my mum was actually calling me, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. My mum was definitely calling my name. I opened the door, frustrated that I was missing part of the game, and yelled an annoyed, "Yeah?" When there was no response, I yelled down from the 3rd floor stairs again, "Yeah?" Then my mum called back and said something like, "Want to show you this," or something like that. I couldn't really make out what she was saying. Annoyed, but not wanting to ignore my mum, I hurried down the stairs onto the 2nd floor. "Where are you?" I called, genuinely not knowing where she was. "Here," she said. It sounded like it was coming from the 1st floor, but something was off. Her voice sounded very muffled and weird. I played it off as just me being paranoid, so I walked down to the 1st floor, now getting a little bit scared. "Mum?" I said. No reply. I searched almost every room and no one was there. That only left one room, the basement. Now, there was no way in heck I was going down there though, so I started heading back towards the stairs when, all of a sudden, the basement door swung open. I yelled, spinning around, but nobody was there. Then I heard footsteps walking down the basement stairs. Someone was definitely there. I then heard my mum say again, "Here," in that same weird muffled voice. In that instant, I got chills down my spine. Something definitely wasn't right. I turned and ran as fast as I could up the stairs and onto the 2nd floor. I ran across the kitchen to the narrow staircase that led up to the 3rd floor. Then I stopped dead in my tracks, paralyzed with fear. At the top of the staircase was what I can only describe as a shadow-like person, without a face, saying in my mother's voice, "Here." I screamed at the top of my lungs and practically threw myself down the stairs and straight out the front door. I then waited outside near the trees, glancing over my shoulder every 2 seconds before my family finally came back from their walk. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me at first, but seeing as I was crying and looking genuinely freaked out, they told me that they believed me. I don't know if they were telling the truth or they just wanted me to feel more comforted, but either way, there was no way that I was sleeping in that building that night. After about 10 minutes of reasoning with them, I decided that I would be more comfortable if I slept with my parents that night. This incident still haunts me to this day, and I rarely, if ever, sleep in a room alone in that house anymore. On a quiet winter evening about a year ago, I witnessed something that I can only describe as out of this world. While out on a walk by the 14 Locks Canal Centre in South Wales, UK with my partner, we were walking down the main canal path going down the hill, and about 2/3 of the way down, the canal sort of locks and we decided that we were going to go back because it was dark and pretty miserable. And I suggested to my partner to cut in through the woods because, why not, right? We drove there for a walk after all. There's a small footbridge and a path which connects you to the main dirt path leading back into the car park from there. And when we were in the wooded area, my partner was complaining that she couldn't see because it was pitch black and was genuinely eerily dark. At this point, we were using the phone torches and I suggested turning the phone lights off to see better because it was that dark that the phone lights just sort of made it worse. So we did, and it did help a little bit. And as we carried on walking towards the main dirt path going back to the car park, as we got onto the dirt path, I spotted something white in the corner of my eye that caught my attention, just by a tree on my 4 to 5 o'clock position, about 12 feet behind me. I turned to get a proper look, and when I looked at it, I was so shook by what I saw that I turned my head away almost instantaneously. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew what I saw, and it freaked me out. About 10 steps later, I said to my partner, "Babe, did you see that?" Of which she replied, "Yes, let's get out of here." As she's saying that too, we glanced behind again, and this thing was right behind us now. At this point, we ran. We really got on them 10 toes, and we didn't stop until we reached the car park. It's funny how the way back to the car park is uphill, and a pretty respectable walk on a good day, but we sprinted up that hill like it was flat, out of adrenaline and pure fear, I guess. Now, I know what I saw was real, and I honestly shivered inside when she replied acknowledging that she saw it too. This thing, whatever it was bright white in color. I can only describe it as a skinny-ish figure, but the thing is that there wasn't any obvious legs, arms, or features. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall and had a glow to it, and it hovered about a foot off the ground as well. I can remember this day like it was yesterday. It was like a white smudge in the air, roughly the shape of like a round milk ice cream stick, but at the same time a little bit transparent. Now, I'd normally be skeptical of ghosts and all that, but if I ever needed solid concrete proof that ghosts or spirits or, dare I say, alien entities exist, then that was it in front of my face. The fact when I asked her, "Did you see that?" and she instantly said, "Yes, let's get out of here," verified that indeed this thing was there, and I wasn't just seeing things. To this day, even when she talks about this story, she describes the exact same thing I saw, pretty much word for word. I'm glad that she was there because she saw it too, because if it was just me, I'd probably be questioning myself right now, thinking that maybe I didn't see that, but no, we both definitely saw it. I've gone back to 14 Lock since then, just to confirm that there's no signs or posts which could have reflected light or something, moonlight or general light pollution, and basically tried to debunk what I saw in any way possible. But the thing is that there's just nothing there that was the same height or even capable of reflecting light, so this thing was there for sure. Was this a ghost sighting though? Why did it just randomly show up, as I've been through there many times over many years and never seen anything like that before? It clearly knew that we were there and it was interested in us, considering that the second time I glanced at it, it seemed to have moved closer to us, much too close for comfort in fact. I've heard similar stories elsewhere and no one believed them either in their stories, but it's crazy to think that there's stuff out there like this. It was 1997. I was 28 and my then boyfriend and I lived in a remote village in Lincolnshire, England. He had a job where he worked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and I was working in a bar, so I would take him to and from work so I could get myself to work with one car that we shared. It's probably worth mentioning too that the car was brand new. It had something crazy like 18 miles on the clock when we got it. I wanted something newer than the car that we had before because I didn't like the idea of being stranded down a dark country lane if the old car decided to just, end itself when I was driving alone. I don't know how many people know Lincolnshire, but most of it is rural with thin winding roads, and the place is so flat that you can see for miles. Now, I used to drive to pick my ex up, and the views in spring when the mornings were getting lighter was and still are absolutely breathtaking. Imagine farmers' fields all around you with basic little roads snaking along the edges. The fields themselves were separated in rows by not quite saplings but trees that would be a couple of years old, still thin and a bit gangly, and at this particular time of year were just starting to show hints of new leaves on their skinny branches. An absolutely beautiful drive in the lighter mornings, mainly because I was usually the only person on the road, so I could also drive as slow as I liked to watch the sun coming up over the horizon. So, I hope I've described the place enough to paint a bit of an image. And here's what happened. So one morning I was driving along the little road. It was about 5:30 in the morning and the sun was just peeking out on the horizon and the sky was completely cloudless. I slowed down to watch it as I often did, not paying much attention to the trees as they were in a row that ran down the side of the field, so they were never in the way of the view. When in my peripheral, I thought that I saw something move against the skinny trees. So I stopped the car completely, thinking that it might be a deer or something interesting like that. I waited for a few seconds and nothing happened, so I was just about to restart the car when I saw two of the trees walking out of the lineup. I say trees, but I don't have a clue what they actually were. Remember, this is a long time before the internet and the Slender Man and all the tales and superstitions, etc. I was literally frozen to the spot with fear. Two tall things walked out of the line of trees and started walking over to me. I was about 50 to 60 yards away from them, and the only thing that I could describe them as were oversized stick insects. They had 2 long legs and 2 long arms that almost touched the ground, and I'd say the tallest one must have been easily 12 feet tall, the smaller one maybe 10. They walked in a fluid motion, as if they were wading through treacle, almost like long hair would glide through water. It was just slow and very graceful. When my brain finally kicked into flight mode, I started my car and glanced over to see how close they had gotten. All the while, I was putting my car into gear and started it moving. The tallest one slowly lifted his arm up, like a silk scarf gliding through light wind, and pointed it at me. And it was then that my car instantly stalled. The dashboard warning lights were all on, all of them lit up, and at the same time I just got the worst pain in my face all of a sudden. Mainly my jaw, but it made me scream out in agony and I almost blacked out. With the pain debilitating me, I knew that I needed to get away, fast. I was so terrified that the car wouldn't start again because all the lights were still on. So I turned the engine entirely off, and thankfully it started again, and I drove like a mad woman to get out of sight. All the time my face or jaw was burning, and when I got to my ex's work, he gave me a bottle of water to cool me down, but it didn't do much to help. And for weeks, my mouth felt like I had chewed on poison ivy, my jaw feeling like I had an abscess under each molar. I needed to see a dentist, and I knew that, but explaining what had happened would have made me feel stupid, so in the end I put it off. I had 3 amalgam fillings, all mallow molars, and once the worst of the pain had gone, a couple of months later, weirdly I couldn't put anything metal in my mouth without getting a shock, like licking a battery shock. So I was eating with plastic cutlery all the time, and decided to give in and see if the dentist would change the fillings to ceramic ones. The dentist looked in my mouth and asked what had happened to my teeth. I played it off casually and asked why, because my fillings apparently looked like balls of mercury. So I explained the car ride, etc., and he said that my fillings looked like they had melted and pulled into smooth, rounded metal balls. I can assure you, too, that every word of this is true. I don't mind banter or questions, but please just don't be mean. It's taken a lot for me to tell this story to you all, and I hope you can appreciate that. I lived in this farmhouse from 2 to 10 years of age, and my mum said ever since we moved there that I would tell her every morning that somebody was sitting at the foot of my bed. I don't recall this because I was so young, but I do remember going to sleep in my brother's room across the hall because the shadow man was in my room. One morning, my mum woke me up for school and said, "Come on, get up." She went to the shower next to my room, but when I finally went to move, I felt something grab my ankles and a low growl sound. I absolutely just froze at that and remembered the anxiety that I felt, and my eyes watering too. The feeling let up and I went to move again very slow, and it did it again. My mum came in and was mad, saying, "I said you need to get up," which I replied, "I can't, something is grabbing me." At that point I was able to get up again. I don't know if this was sleep paralysis or, well, what it was, but I also remember that we had a cat, Oreo, and she never slept with me. So one night I carried her to my room and shut the door so that she had to sleep with me. The minute that I sat her down, she ran under the bed and growled so loud, meowing in distress. She jumped up onto the bed on my chest, swatting my face, and bit me, and then ran back under the bed growling again. I remember leaping from the bed scared that she was going to bite my ankles, and when I opened the door, she sprinted out of the room. I didn't think anything of it at the time until I got a bit older. There's honestly many more stories to that house as well. Me and my brother both saw the Shadow Man and watched him reach up to the shelf on the wall. On the shelf was a big glass unicorn my mum got from Mexico. He touched it and it fell to the ground and shattered. My parents woke up from it and we told them the Shadow Man did it, but obviously they didn't believe us and thought that we had done it. And we still remember this to this day. Before we inherited the house, my dad's uncle lived there alone, and one day he came home and had a heart attack in the front door and fell down the steps and wasn't found until later. My mum also said at night that she'd hear a 5-gallon bucket being tossed back and forth in the basement for some reason. But perhaps the scariest thing is that I reached out to the owners who bought our farm. I asked them if anything unusual happens in the house, and they responded with a text message. It read, "I know at least a few times they have. I don't remember anything specifically besides one time Lauren was putting his boy to bed when he was young and Trayton told him that there was someone in the doorway and that he hung out up there sometimes when obviously there wasn't." That message sent chills down my spine.